has just given two assurances for Julian Assange. One in relation to constitutional rights he may have if extradited to the United States, and the other in relation to the death penalty. The first assurance seems deceptive because it says he may seek to rely specifically on the First Amendment, but that it is up to the US judiciary to decide whether it can be applied. What the US is not saying, however, is that it is a matter of long established law, as stated by Judge Kavanaugh in the 2020 USAID versus Open Society case in the Supreme Court. And there are reportedly many other precedents that foreign nationals acting abroad don't have any constitutional rights. This would cause the immediate barring of Julian's First Amendment protection purely on grounds of nationality. And this, according to former British Ambassador Craig Murray, is what breaks Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. It also seems to violate Section 81 of the UK's Domestic Extradition Act, which is a bar on extradition related to various forms of discrimination, including nationality. Is it time for Australia to tell the US executive that its assurance does not assure, because the judiciary will say it can't, and either insist on the case being sent to the European Court of Human Rights to decide on the Article 10 issue, or just drop the charges as per their domestic legislation, because they've hit a brick wall with the UK's demand that Julian will not be, quote, potentially very greatly prejudiced on grounds of his nationality.
Well, I think one of the key principles underlying extradition, at least from countries like the United Kingdom and Australia, has been that anyone extradited will at least get equal treatment before the laws of the court to which they're being extradited, that you're not going to be prejudiced in the criminal proceedings because you're a foreigner. The US gave some kind of assurance on the death penalty. Whether you believe that assurance or not, given the US past history, is another matter, but they did purport to give an assurance on not seeking the death penalty for Julian Assange. But on the second point, they gave what lawyers would normally call a mendacious assurance, well, basically a deceitful, purported assurance, that on the First Amendment rights, the US assurance, if you could call it that, was that there was nothing to prevent Julian Assange from seeking to get First Amendment protections if he's prosecuted in the United States. And they said that quite loudly. And what they didn't say, but it screams at you from the US response, what they didn't say is that, yes, sure, Julian Assange can seek to have First Amendment rights, the right to free speech. But the US government, consistent with long-standing position, will viciously oppose that right and do everything they possibly can to prevent him having First Amendment rights in every possible way, in every argument, in every US court.
So I am just so excited to have Kathy Vogan here. Kathy is executive producer of Consortium News, which I've watched for a long time, and they have been amazing on the Assange case. But Kathy also does amazing video editing, and I played a couple clips of her on our broadcast, and now we have her for real, live from Australia. So thank you so much for joining, Kathy.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So do you want to elaborate any more on that? I mean, that was very thorough, very disheartening as well. But do you want to elaborate on that any further? And you'll be at the hearing on the 20th, right?
I will. Yes. I'll just start by elaborating a little bit. Of course, there were 3 points where Julian was granted the potential of leave to appeal. It's very tricky. It's very strange, really, that they're handing it back to the United States again to offer more assurances, because if you look at the law, it just says that the judges can either deny or grant leave to appeal. But they chose a third option, to send it back for a second round of assurances to the United States. Now, there were three different points. One was the death penalty, and of course the UK. In fact, we too, and well, in America it's different, but Britain doesn't extradite to a country where there is even a risk of a death penalty being imposed. So they asked for that assurance that it would neither be imposed nor carried out. Well, I suppose in the other order. So not carried out, but not even imposed. And then there was another one that was about his Julian Assange's First Amendment protection. The judge said that Julian has, he believes that if he can plead First Amendment, the First Amendment, that the case will fail against him. So therefore, and this is the judge speaking, the First Amendment is central to his defense. So they asked the US court for the First Amendment assurance. And the third one was that he would not be prejudiced by reason of his nationality. And that means more generally, in his hearings in the past and in the submissions, there's also been mention of his Article 7 rights, which is sort of equivalent to the Fifth Amendment. And that is about the foreseeability of something being a crime. You have to know it's a crime. And certainly back in 2010, it would have been impossible for Julian Assange to anticipate that these publications were going to lead to a charge of espionage. So, his Article 7 or Fifth Amendment protection is really important as well. And that's, just that all came under this umbrella of not being prejudiced, very greatly prejudiced against in court, just on grounds of his nationality. Now, what the US did was they only sent back two assurances when there were three different points, and the death penalty was one, and then the other two they quite cunningly rolled into one. And of course, the assurance was that yes, as Senator Shoebridge repeats, he has every right to seek to rely on the First Amendment. They didn't mention his other potential constitutional rights, but that it is exclusively up to the judiciary to decide whether it can be applied. And of course, we know from this 2020 USAID versus Open Society case presided over by Judge Kavanaugh, that he repeated what he said was a long settled law that foreign nationals acting abroad do not have constitutional protection. That's what enables the United States to go after terrorists and the like. So foreign nationals who reside in the US may have some rights, but if you've acted abroad and you're a foreign national, it's no. So that leaves him really in a very, very difficult position. And I think it leaves the UK in a difficult position because this is a non-assurance. So, in a normal world, they would probably say, well, we can't proceed. We can't extradite in that case.
Well, I think Stella Assange referred to them as weasel words, what they said, because it really doesn't hold water, these assurances. There's no guarantee.
I don't think they fool anyone. I mean, we've all picked it up. So, and if I just think back to this last renewal appeal, these judges were definitely different from the ones that came before. They kept challenging the prosecution. They kept interrupting him. them when it was always the other way around. It was always the defense that was being interrupted with Baratza and Holyrood and Burnett. And they were really, quite intimidating, really, badgering them. But it was the other way around this time. And they brought up a few points that were highly relevant. One which points to there being no dual criminality between the Espionage Act and the Official Secrets Act. So it's strict liability with the Espionage Act. Did you publish it, or didn't you? Or did you possess it, or didn't you? It's a yes or no answer, and there's no right to a public interest defense. But with the Official Secrets Act, and we've seen this from a very famous case called the Spycatcher case, which was defended by Malcolm Turnbull, who later became Australia's Prime Minister, that it is not an offence to publish material, classified material, if it is already in the public domain. And, the thing is that the prosecution tried to hide the fact, and this is going right back to the extradition hearing, that other people published this material first, right? And I'm talking about the unredacted cables, which is that's what there was no dispute about there being redaction before that, but these unredacted cables got out through another party, and WikiLeaks wasn't the source of that publication, and so there was John Young from Cryptome, who incidentally is an American citizen residing in the United States. So, he's definitely guaranteed First Amendment protection. One could speculate that that's why he didn't get charged.
Now, for anybody that might not know who he is, I heard you mention that again recently somewhere on a podcast or something, or maybe it was one of the clips you sent me. But so this guy, Cryptome, John Young, he's been kind of saying, well, you should be coming after me as well, right? And they're just ignoring them. Yeah.
Yes, and so was Daniel Ellsberg.
Right.
Because he was given a copy of the publications as a safeguard, right? In case anything happened to Julian and WikiLeaks, Ellsberg would have them as well. So he was standing by to be, the US publisher in that case. And he came forward as well. And he said, you got to charge me too. But really, I mean, they ought to be charging the New York Times, the Guardian, Der Spiegel, Le Monde, the lot of them. But it's been very much a selective prosecution. And, not just John Young, of course. There was the Pirate Bay and hundreds of other websites that had published the unredacted cables in searchable format before WikiLeaks finally did. And the reason that they did was because it was clear that these names were out there, and anyone with a high level of technical expertise, because you required that at that stage, could get access. Not ordinary people. It was too complicated, right? But intelligence agencies, states could, and so WikiLeaks, their sole reason for publishing them, and this was after the others, was to protect people, to actually warn them, get the hell out of there, because pretty soon people will be coming after you. I mean, even criminal organizations as well could have been coming after these people for being informants. So, it was felt like it was a duty to, even though these people were informants, to actually try to save their life. And what was the result? Well, nobody got killed.
Right.
We've known that since Chelsea Manning's court-martial.
And that's another one of those things that is misrepresented all the time. So,
well, the U.S. keeps stating it over and over again, or they use weasel words and they say things like "might have been killed," "this might have harmed people," right? And then,
oh yes.
But what we just discussing there, Kathy, Didn't Julian Assange actually call the State Department himself to warn them
He
that
did.
these were being?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
He tried to get
Yes.
Hillary Clinton on the line. I think it's in one of, I forget which film it is. But yeah, it's out in that movie documentary, and they're
Risk.
trying to get her on the phone and warn them.
Yes. Yes, and they could have done something. He said, please, the release. So that's before anyone published yet.
Mhm.
Please, the release is imminent, and you can do something about it to stop this. That now there will be a great risk. There hadn't been any risk up until then because there was, especially from the State Department cables, there was an ingenious method of redaction. I mean, one of the methods was to compare everything that was in the documents to the dictionary. And if the word was not in the dictionary, it was probably somebody's name, right? Get rid of it. Don't take any risks. But, WikiLeaks was also criticized for redacting more than the New York Times, right? That's how meticulous Julian was.
I mean, they have 100% accuracy rate, which I do hear people repeat a lot. But, then what news organization can the New York Times say that? The Washington Post? No. They have to correct things all the time.
Yeah, he was really strict about security as well, making sure that nothing would leak out. But it was a former colleague that made off with the unredacted material. But Matthew, as you point out, right from day one, after the State Department cables, in fact, after the Afghan war diaries, they were always talking about this hypothetical blood rather than the real blood that had been shed.
That's right. Yeah, my dogs might get the keys to my car and drive off, right? Like you can go down that road of hypotheticals in ways that's what I was thinking about with this idea of Julian Assange may seek these protections. And I said this to my friend the other day when we were talking about this. It's like, my dogs may ask for a second breakfast. They're not going to get it, but I mean, like, it really is like you see the language they use, but how dangerous that is, because language has no meaning to these people. They use it with in whatever manner they want to achieve what they want. I think they feel because of their power that they are able to create language that meets their needs. And I mean, so when you're in the court, Kathy, and the justices there are receiving this, you said these two justices did push back more on the prosecution than previous justices have, but they just still take it though. I mean, these assurances, they've been accepted correctly. Is that correct? Or in the May 20th hearing, will the assurances then be debated?
Yeah. Yes. And that's something quite novel because there were assurances before. And this was straight after the extradition hearing. And, all four of the medical expert witnesses on both sides, two on each side, agreed that Julian was a moderate to high suicide risk if he were to be extradited. And that wasn't the only thing that tipped the decision in his favor. The other reason was the testimony of Maureen Baird, who was a special administrative measures administrator. And she attested to the appalling conditions.
I played that clip of
US prisons.
I played the clip of you discussing that on another show last time. I've also got, I would love to, you've probably heard this, and this is just a still of Julian, but this was on Randy's show. He's talking about the special administrative measures. It's just terrifying.
It's possible, depending on the shifts in US politics, that I would be sentenced to death. Probably not, but that doesn't mean there's not a risk of a sort of living death. In the United States, there's something called SAMS, and for national security cases, terrorism cases, They put people in SAMS restrictions, which is you're in incommunicado detention. So even if you communicate something to the public through your lawyer, the lawyer goes to prison. And this has happened in the United States.
It's just terrifying.
Yeah,
But-
that's basically the end of the story. And of course, who decides if somebody gets SAMS? Who recommends that? Well,
The
it's the
CIA.
good old CIA.
Well, the other
So
thing too,
they get to torture him in the end. He's not going into safe hands.
so at the beginning of that clip, we hear Julian talk about how shifting political, the shifting political winds or whatever. I mean, isn't that? I mean, that I think for a lot of us, we look at this and we say, this is the Biden administration giving these assurances. We could have a different. We very likely have a different administration next year. The administration that plotted to kidnap and to kill Julian Assange. But that wasn't taken into account by the court either, right? The court allowed for these assurances to be made by an administration that a future administration can just dismiss as they want, right?
Well, it wasn't really the administration. I mean, Trump was more or less going to go along with it, but it was actually Mike Pompeo. It was the CIA.
Yeah.
And, we still have the CIA. So there's nothing, well, Pompeo's not leading it anymore, but, there's still a lot of anger from Vault 7. But just to get back to this first round of assurances. So the thing is that America then gave assurances that, he'll be okay. We'll treat him well, right? This suicide risk, right? We'll treat him okay. And the UK said fine, right, and overturned the decision. So Julian's team tried to apply to the Supreme Court, and one of the issues was the timing of these assurances, so that they had not been able to, discuss them and argue in court that, the extradition hearing was over. And John Pilger said, my God, what was the point of those 4 weeks of hearings? And that we got a completely different outcome. And now with the simple trust of the United Kingdom in the United States to treat Julian well, after having heard all that testimony about the conditions in SAMS, and of course there was also the assurance that Julian Assange would not be placed under SAMS, but they said unless he does something to then warrant such.
So you have to know. They have to know that this is the case. I don't believe that they don't know that this can happen. They must.
Well, it's stated quite clearly in the assurance. There is that caveat that if he does something after, he won't be put in SAMS initially. But what John Kiriakou said, looked at a guard the wrong way could be a reason.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So
and because it's, I'm sorry, Kelly, but because
go ahead.
it's the CIA or the NSA who's going to recommend him being put in SAMS, I mean, I guess the fear is that they will do that and they'll say, we can't tell you why it's classified. Yeah. Right.
Of course.
Well, that's what they're saying now in the case with the American journalists that have sued the CIA for when they visited in the embassy. They're just saying, oh, it's state secret. They're trying to get it dismissed. Like, oh, we don't, national security, we don't have to tell. So, yeah. Well, you've been
sure Judge Cottle is going to buy that, though. He's really, if you remember, there was this lawsuit that Hillary Clinton initiated against the Trump campaign, the Russian government, and WikiLeaks for some kind of collusion. And there was, I think the RICO Act and everything thrown, the kitchen sink type of thing. And Judge Cottle threw it out of court, and he said these publications deserve the highest possible protection under the First Amendment. So, he's not one to be intimidated, Cottle.
Well, fingers crossed on that one. But so you have been in, how many of the hearings have you been actually in the courtroom?
All of them.
All of them. Oh, okay. Wow. Well, you have I'm amazed at all that you do, Kathy, because I know what you do behind the scenes, and then you know all the ins and outs of this case. And it is a lot. It's too bad we didn't have, we had a skeleton crew anyway. We may have a candidate show up late, but it's too bad we didn't have more join because, yeah, but that's okay. Hopefully people will watch later, and also, go to Consortium News and watch the broadcast there, because you guys have been very thorough about this case for a long time. And I know it's where I've gotten a lot of my information on it. But go ahead, Kathy.
Well, I was just going to say, thankfully, Consortium News puts the bill for me to go from Australia to London, because that has become necessary now. Right. This is another one of these seemingly arbitrary rules, which, seem to be saying, well, no, this is true for, all cases, that we won't give remote access to anyone who is outside the jurisdiction of England and Wales. And they put this in writing, that it's because if anybody breaks the rules, like takes a photograph, does a recording, we wouldn't be able to prosecute them. So now, for the next hearing, and I've been in touch with the court about this and said, like, come on, guys, we're nice to each other. But Australian and American journalists, the court said that they would give special consideration to us because we are from the applicant and respondent. The applicant's Julian Assange now, and this appeal, respondent, the United States. Well, in those two countries, because especially in Australia, the Assange story is of enormous public interest, right? Now, I happened to be in London last time, but I do know that every journalist in Australia, and lawyers and politicians, they were all refused remote access last time. And I said, my goodness, really? So do I have to fly around the world for a 2-hour hearing? 2 hours?
So what's the story with that this time then? Are you already guaranteed?
Yes.
You're already guaranteed to be inside, right?
Not yet. They said you have the right to seek to apply for access.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Like last time.
You can ask, but we won't necessarily say yes. So it was pretty identical, but this time there's no mention of special consideration for US and American journalists. So that's why Consortium is not taking a risk.
We have a candidate who showed up.
And they had, and last time, Kathy, you guys had a lot of problems with the audio there, right? You were in a separate room, and there was a lot of
I
issues.
Wasn't.
Oh, you weren't? Okay. But many of the journalists were, though, right?
Oh, yeah. I was given a place in Gallery 5. That's the main court.
Okay.
Up the stairs. And I just went, no way am I going in there, because they really stuff you around. And then there was an overspill court as well. But I was the token Australian journalist, you see. And that wasn't a protest. But what I opted for instead, I had applied for remote access and in-court access, and I opted for the remote access with a very powerful pair of headphones. And so I heard all the things that the people in the overflow court didn't hear.
Okay, yeah.
That's what I'll do again. Hello.
Hi there. How are you all doing?
Hi, Hank. So I thought you weren't coming till May 9th, but so nice of you to show up.
Well, I got a link, and I'm my own support team. So
okay,
I'll have
great.
To speak to my staff. Schedule.
Yeah, Matt ran for office here in North Carolina. He knows all about that.
Yeah.
So do you know Anderson?
Anderson
Clayton, I think is her name.
Yes, the head of the Democratic Party here in North Carolina.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful sign, I think, but I'm looking from a distance.
Well, Matt ran as a green, actually.
Yeah. I'm not sure. Like, it's great. The problem is the Democratic Party has just performed very poorly across the state. And even after this last election in 2022, when they lost the state Supreme Court. They lost the Senate seats. I mean, they lost all the House races. Barely. They won one that was competitive, a House race that they should have won by a mile. They squeaked by in it. They barely voted Anderson Clayton in as the new head of the party. The lady who had been there, who had just done a terrible job for a long time, almost stayed on. So there's a lot of those issues. But Hank, where are you?
I'm in Falls of Rough, Kentucky. I've been a Democratic nominee since 2018 in Kentucky's 2nd district. I'm in no danger of getting elected. You know what I mean? So what I've come up with is, and I was very idealistic. My history, my background is in the music business. So I worked on the last Eagles record. I worked on the last Don Henley record. I've done Chicago records. I used to work for Joni Mitchell. So I did a lot of that stuff. But in 2017, someone challenged me to run in Kentucky, and the district that I'm in did not even have a candidate in 2016, the year that Trump won. So the guy I'm running against is a guy named Brett Guthrie, and I bet you've never heard of him, right?
Nope.
So in 2009, he got elected. Or he first started serving. He went to Congress in 2009. His net worth was $422,000. By 2017, it had ballooned, partially because his family's business that he's a 25% owner had started to get a bunch of Small Business Administration loans. So he was up to 7.6 million in 2018 or 2017. In 2020, his family business got the largest PPP loan of any business in the United States owned by an elected official, even ahead of Trump, $4.4 million. And then he voted against more PPP support for the rest of us. He's supported by Big Pharma, the NRA. He's a very smart guy.
And so he's for Assange and for the First Amendment rights.
I don't think, I think it would depend on what he was. I don't think it's a concern of his.
No. Well, I really appreciate you being here. It's, there are some great candidates across the country, but they're not easy to find. I think it's very polarized, and it's hard to find people. Thank you. I mean, as a Democrat, I really appreciate you being here, because that's probably my hardest party representative.
Kelly, where are you?
North Carolina.
Okay, you're also in North Carolina.
Yeah, very blue area of the state, Chapel Hill. So
okay,
yeah.
Well, at some
Kathy
point,
is in Australia right now. Actually, just to let you know, Hank.
Oh, you're in
Hello.
Australia right now.
Yes.
Yes. Have you heard of Consortium
Sydney,
News?
down under?
So I have friends from Australia, and this is just great. I'd tell people when I lived in California, I'm from California, and they'd say, "Oh, do you know Bill?" So, but a musical friend of mine is from Australia, and his dad was the string arranger and conductor and orchestra wrangler for Frank Sinatra whenever he came to Australia and New Zealand. And his last name was Falson. So I don't know if you knew a Falson down there.
Well,
no, it would have been a while ago, no?
Well, it would have
What
been.
about you? Are you a musician or are you an engineer?
I'm a musician
Producer.
and a recording engineer. Wash your car, go get the sushi. What do we got to do to finish this record? I can mix,
that sounds
I
like
can
a good
sing,
candidate.
I can write a song. I can do whatever we need to do.
Well, if you're talking to people in your district at all, if anybody's interested about the Assange case, I really recommend tell them to go to Consortium News.
Okay.
And this woman here does so much there, and I mean they covered the story. Everything you want to know about it, and there are other good outlets as well. But I think you guys definitely. Kathy's been in. She was just saying. I don't know if you heard before you came on. She's been inside the courtroom for every hearing.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So she knows all of it.
Inside the courtroom, were you doing it
live tweeting from the courtroom every time.
telephonically, or were you physically there?
On Twitter.
On Twitter?
X.
No, what I mean, how were you attending the courtroom?
Well,
physically in there.
No.
Yes,
you weren't. I have been. In February 2020, I was physically in the courtroom, but you know, you get treated so badly, and it's very, very hard to hear when you're actually in there. The technology is awful. Richie Medhurst said that he wants to buy them lapel mics so that even the lawyers who are speaking in court. So no, I opt for, you have to go over now to be inside the jurisdiction of England and Wales to listen remotely. You can't do it from Australia anymore. And so I opt for remote access in London with a very powerful pair of headphones to get, to hear.
Sorry, I got that confused. But it is confusing. I couldn't tell, during the hearing, I was switching back and forth between your Twitter account and I think another Assange News. And I couldn't tell really who, and Stefania Marizzi, and I couldn't tell who was like remote and who was actually in there. But it did seem, I think Stefania was actually physically in there this last time, I think.
Yeah.
And she couldn't hear anything. So
that's right.
But you know what? This is a really good time because I do want to play this really short clip of Hedges, Chris Hedges, and he's talking about the street action, which is happening right now on another issue, but about how that could be heard inside the courtroom and how much that really made a difference. So we'll play that. I'll be right back.
Well, I was close friends with Michael Ratner, who was Julian's lawyer. That's how I met and spent time with Julian. I would fly to London with Michael. And Michael always said that he couldn't do it. He was the head of the Center for Constitutional Rights. He couldn't do his work unless there were people in the street. And there was a moment where Baritza, I was in London, and she started complaining about the noise in the streets filtering into the courtroom. It's absolutely key. They do feel this pressure. I think that there are good reasons why the Biden administration does not want Julian extradited before the elections. I think the heaviest pressure has come from Australia, finally, with the parliament. It's very, very important. It took a long time to get here. And we've just seen, I think, and of course, I covered the Middle East for the New York Times. I spent a lot of time in Gaza. These sustained protests against the genocide they've not accomplished what we want them to accomplish, but they're extremely effective in terms of mechanisms of pressure. And we have to put that same kind of pressure on behalf of Julian because it does work. It doesn't always work, but it is the only thing that will work.
I just thought that was interesting because we've talked about this before here. There's kind of, I think in the activist community, there's this, you're either on the street action, and those people don't really have faith in electoral politics, or you're on, I guess, trying to work from the inside. But I kind of think we need both. I don't know. What do you think, Hank?
So what I've learned in Kentucky, and I suspect it's the same in North Carolina, is that Democrats don't want any advice from Republicans, and Republicans don't want any advice from Democrats. So all of the things they say that are horrible about each other, there's no real purpose to it. So the only party I think I might be able to change his mind. So I'm definitely using this race as a way of applying leverage to my own party. Mm-hmm. The primary thing that I'm trying to get them to do is to return to focusing on working people, no matter where they live, and rural people, whether they work or not. So rural and working folks. I don't want that to be confused as only people who live in rural areas that work. It's working people wherever they are, and rural people whether they work or not. And even something that simple, we have the largest Toyota plant in the world in Kentucky, in Georgetown, Kentucky, and I'm supported by the UAW. And I have been proposing to our party that we come out publicly in favor of unionizing, and so far no takers. I think Chris is absolutely right about the crowd, and it's similar to what Tom Frank says, and I'm a Tom Frank disciple, which is the only counter to the oligarchic control of our government is a broad-based populist movement, a grassroots movement. Do you all know who Wendell Berry is?
Yeah.
All of you do?
Yeah.
Oh, Stefania doesn't. So Wendell Berry, I got lectured when I didn't have a satisfactory answer about do I know who Wendell Berry is? And the farmer, 77-year-old guy, who when he shook my hand, it felt like shaking hands with a brick. You know, he could have beaten all of us. He said, Wendell Berry is the greatest Kentuckian who ever lived, which makes Muhammad Ali or Abraham Lincoln second place.
Wow.
His most recent book is called The Need to Be Whole. And the quote that I've memorized is, what we're up against is an extractive economy run by a tiny minority of the wealthiest people. And from that, the impoverishment, poisoning, and pollution of the natural world, the dissolution of all human community, and damage to individuals and families. The short version of that, I call it something that rhymes with ship show. And I find that there's a lot of agreement that we are in a ship show right now. And I get that from Republicans and Democrats. So I'm also involved with a group called Braver Angels. And if you don't know about Braver Angels, they're worth looking at. They're the largest group in the country working to heal division between left and right and looking for common ground. So, you know, one of the things that's in the way of any kind of progress, and Julian's case is in a way so remote to the problems that people in rural Kentucky or rural North Carolina are concerned about. I was just in Owensboro. Owensboro is, I guess, 58,000 people. And I had never seen homeless people there before, but the last couple of visits, I was starting to see them. They have 300 people on the streets a night. So there are so many ways that our society is failing that it's difficult to get even a conversation about Julian Assange, for example. I'm of course willing to have that conversation, but things are so screwed up for so many people, and so a lot of what I end up doing is trying to combine concepts that do get talked about, like social justice. You know, Democrats talk about LGBTQ rights constantly. So I'm starting to pitch the idea of there's not enough in any of those identity groups that Democrats focus on to make a difference. The largest identity group in our country is blue collar workers. There's something like 60% of the country. So it seems to me combining social justice with labor is the way forward. I just spoke to the president of the NAACP and pitched this idea to her, and she said, we're already doing it. So some way of combining these social concerns, and I'm lumping Julian in with that as well, with things that affect normal people, I think is going to be the challenge. And a lot of that is healing the division at the grassroots, because that division prevents us from getting much of anything done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've had several candidates also just kind of mention transparency in general. I mean, we don't have that in so many areas. And I think obviously WikiLeaks represents that transparency. I think that we all want. So we're represented in government. And
yes. And you know, I get it that there are things that need to be kept secret, but when you're busted and you're caught lying, you know, wasn't the one of the initial pieces was the bombing of a wedding, and innocent people are killed and no terrorists killed, but just a bunch of people in our government lied about it. And so one of the things that gets released is the video from the fighter pilots who are bombing the wedding. And the right thing would have been for the government to come forward and say, complete cluster on our part.
I think, Hank, that's a good way to reconcile that gulf between what Julian's case is or that perceived gulf between what Julian's case is and what you're encountering out there with folks in your community, is this two set of rules, right? So the government's allowed to cover up war crimes and persecute the people who, reveal them. But then the rules for normal working folks aren't the same, right? I mean, so you tie that into the banks get bailed out, but you're on your own for all your decisions, I mean, so it's a little more complicated than you want to be trying to certainly when you're on the campaign trail, you don't want to be making like these rhetorical extrapolations or trying to make these things connect. But there is a line there, and I think one of the things that you see, we talk a lot about here and maybe this is something you see more of, is how the First Amendment and Fourth Amendment issues overlap, right? The government, in order for the government to censor you, they need to know what you're saying. And so in order to violate your First Amendment rights, they need to violate your Fourth Amendment rights, right? I mean, so that type, and so you can draw that connection then too between not just surveillance, but but also the censorship aspect. So we had this conversation last week. We had actually a candidate from Kentucky. He was a school teacher, and he was speaking about this, about how his students very much, while they may not understand the Julian Assange case, they can certainly understand the connection between Julian Assange and, say, the banning of TikTok. And
Do you remember who the candidate was?
William Compton.
Oh, he's my opponent in the.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you would have gotten along just fine if you came at the same time, but you'll have something to talk about. So one of the activists that makes a lot of phone calls to our current representatives kind of took the first vote that was against the TikTok ban and made another list, Paula Iacella with Assange Defense Boston. And so she took those elected people and started focused on calling them and trying to sort of tie these two issues together. But then we learned just recently that, I guess because, the original version of the TikTok ban would have forced the Chinese parent company ByteDance to divest, I think it was 6 months. Yeah. And then, so the new revised one now says a year, I believe, 12 months or a year. And so now we went from all of these representatives who voted against the TikTok ban have now changed their vote. So I know this is probably too small for you to read right here, but it told me two things. Like, one, we have to really watch, like they will vote for something and then a month later turn around and vote against it. So we have to stay on top of it and watch. And also they put these things in with other, with other issues. So with the Ukraine aid bill and stuff, and then they change their votes. But yes, William was saying that his students are not too keen on the TikTok ban. They're losing a lot of young people with that. So I wonder if has that come up at all?
Well, not really. I mean, the reality in Kentucky is that Kentucky is going to be a red state for some time. And when our governor, Beshear, the son of Steve Beshear, who had been governor for 2 terms, was elected in 2019, we had 45 Democrats in the state house. The next year, we lost 20 seats, 6 of them by a combined total of 96 votes. Wow. And that's because the Democratic Party, when there's a Democratic governor, the party is controlled by the governor. So the party has never contributed to any federal candidates in the 1st, 2nd, 4th, or 5th district. We have 6 districts. 4 are clearly rural. Democrats haven't invested for 2 or 3 decades. So the situation is pretty dire. Mm-hmm. And so the approach of, I just don't, it's a discussion that I have with someone who brings it up, but generally in politics, you get about 13 syllables to when you meet someone new. And for example, I go to Walmart and I've worked on this for a long time. Like I say, I didn't know anything when I started in 2018. I was a guitar player and I still am. But what I've worked out now is I say to people when I go to Walmart, I talk to people and I say, my name's Hank. I'm running for Congress. I'm a damn Democrat, but I'm a working person. And I think we need more working people in our government. I honestly think that more working people in our government would affect all of these issues in a tremendous way. Right now, our government, of the people in our current government in Congress, what I'm told is that 2% were working a blue-collar job before they were elected, directly before they were elected. But 60% of the country is either blue-collar or connected to it. And I include musicians as blue-collar. So I think issues like Julian's case are very difficult to stir up trouble at the grassroots, with few exceptions, perhaps at universities and that sort of thing. But, our Democratic Party, we spend a lot of time, and I'm a Bernie Sanders liberal. I'm all in favor of rights for LGBTQ folks, but trans folks represent 0.6% of our population. And for the amount of time we talk about them, we could make the world perfect for trans people and it would still suck for blue collar people. Ironically, if, there are trans people that are working people too. There are Black people that are working people. The work knows no color. It knows no gender. It knows no age. And if we had a society that was more egalitarian towards working, when I get into arguments about DEI with liberals, I say, well, why aren't we applying DEI to working people? End of discussion. So in other words, I think that I appreciate what you all are doing, and you're at one end of the stick and I'm at a different end of the stick.
Well, I wonder, Kathy, do you have any ideas of what?
Sorry about that, sir.
Oh, no, just
well, I can't help thinking of the Workers' Party of Britain and how that,
Right.
there are all these, it's just exploded. They're going to be running now in every jurisdiction, constituency, I should say. And there are all these people who are defecting from the Labour Party and going across to the Workers' Party. And in fact, the idea of the Workers' Party is that it is just like Labour was when it first started, that it represented working people. And of course, the Labour Party now and the Tories, I mean, they're a uni-party and they're not interested in working people at all. So this idea has really exploded in the United Kingdom. And I don't see why it couldn't in the United States as well.
I've been having these conversations. So I'm supported by the UAW. And God bless my friends who are in the Eagles. I worked for Timothy Schmidt for 20 some years, and he's the bass player for the Eagles. So when I called him and told him that I wanted to run, he said, I want to be the first person to contribute. And he's been giving full contributions the whole time. He also has allowed me to bring people to Eagles concerts and take them backstage. And one of the first people I brought backstage is a guy named Mark. And now, because I'm old, I can't remember his name. I can see his face. But Mark is was the political director for the UAW in the state of Kentucky. He is now political director for the southern states. So he has seven states. Mm-hmm. Mark Dowell. And he and his wife came backstage recently. And, anyway, I have been pitching fairly wild ideas to the unions for a little while and been saying to them, for about $500,000, you could buy a state Democratic Party if you wanted to. And you could make that party say worker, 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 labor, labor, labor. Yeah. And that freaked them out a little bit, but they are going to give me some money for a PAC. They are less likely now to give money directly to the Democratic Party. They've given all kinds of money to the Democratic Party. They're talking more about individual candidates. And I'm trying to get them to help set up a PAC with me that would do the work of organizing at the grassroots of Democratic parties that the state party will not do. Mm-hmm. And again, this should scare the living daylights out of both parties.
Well, hopefully transparency can be part of that.
Pardon me?
Hopefully transparency can be part of that. Selling that is how important that, we can't have a democracy without that transparency, right?
You can't. And by the way, in the United States, I don't know if you all saw about maybe 4 or 5 months ago, Sean Fain announced a joint strike in 2028 of the UAW and the AFL-CIO, the two biggest unions in the country. Have you all heard about this?
I haven't.
Okay, well, this was announced a while back, and it was it's because the contracts expire at more or less the same time. Mm-hmm. And Sean Fain has been brilliant at moving the UAW forward and announcing a strike 4 years in advance. That's unheard of. It's also, by the way, unheard of a president in a State of the Union address to acknowledge a union leader that's been kicking ass. So I can't think ever of the time that's happening. Well, so I reached out to Mark and said, if there were a way to have average people contribute or be part of this strike, it would be a good thing. So to try and turn it into a general strike, or that we combine the idea of unionizing Walmart. Walmart will not be or unionized from the inside. I am still pitching them the idea of, you guys could become a party here if you aren't careful, with a smile on my face, and they get a little like that. But they see the point. To your point, yes, in other nations we are used to having multiple parties. In the United States, we're still squeamish about it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have three parties, but I'm going to predict it this way: union political power is going to explode over the next 4 years in the United States, and the party that makes friends with them is going to be the party in charge for the next 20 years, in my opinion.
Well, no, they've always just had two in the United Kingdom as well. It's just that, people have really been feeling the pain. And it's, to do with where the money's going to all of these foreign wars. People have had to choose between heating and eating. That's how hard up they are. I mean, and especially in the north of England, starting with the end of the cotton industry, when they shut down all of the mills and the mines. These people were sort of abandoned. And Manchester, for example, was where most of the wealth of the United Kingdom was made. But then there was no further interest there in these people, and they were just abandoned. So, but they were getting by, but now they've been feeling the pinch so hard. They don't want these wars, but they would rather have the money put into their pockets and better health system, better education, stuff that everyday people need. And not just the working class, but the whole country.
Well, there's another way to talk about Assange, the wars. I mean, WikiLeaks exposed so much about our wars that we would have not ever known. So I think that's another great way to maybe talk to people, because especially young people now are paying a lot more attention to what's going on around the globe. Well, we are at the top of the hour, but you're a musician. I wish I had known you could send me something to play, but I found this great musician. They're doing these Stella's organized it, I believe, Stella Assange, the Sunday concerts for Assange.
Yep.
And they've got several great musicians. This one guy, Michael Brunick, I found he's got several great songs, but I settled on this one for tonight. So I just thank you so much for coming, Hank. I wasn't expecting you. That was
I apologize
nice
for being late. I had to drive up to Owensboro they were doing a meeting, and when you're a candidate, you have to show your face.
Right.
And fortunately, I was able to leave.
No need to apologize.
Yeah, that's okay.
How do people follow you, Hank? How do people support you?
Well, let's do this. I have to admit, I'm not trying very hard to win this primary, and if I lose the primary, I'm going to look at it as a get out of jail free card.
You're an honest man. You're an honest man.
Well, you can at least change the conversation a little bit, maybe.
Absolutely.
And maybe you go out next time and talk about Assange a little bit.
I'm going to give you all some phone numbers, and any of you that would like to. I do some live kind of podcasting that I do. Once I start doing it, I have to keep doing it. So I'm putting off starting it. I have to keep doing it until the election. So I'm kind of holding off as long as I possibly can. But I would love to, if any of you would like to talk about this, be happy to do like a StreamYard or a Zoom meeting that we record that I would then play for. It's difficult to do all that live.
Yes.
But it's perfectly fine to do a meeting, record it, make sure it's edited okay. And let me see. I'm sending you my phone numbers.
Are you putting these in the chat? I think yes. Matt also wanted you to just tell anybody watching how to reach out.
If you have a Twitter, or you've got a website or Instagram or anything.
I don't do a lot of social.
Okay.
HankForKentucky.com is probably the eeasiest way, and then on Facebook.
Okay, so HankForKY.com. So if people want to support Hank, they like you, they like this guy, hey, HankForKY.
Oh, we have an audience? I had no idea we had an audience.
Yeah, we have an audience. Yeah.
Hi, everybody.
We'll get a few thousand people to watch it. So okay. And then Kathy, how do folks follow you, watch you on Consortium News, and you know? benefit. That way.
Consortium News, and we have a channel as well, so it's audio visual as well as text. But there's the link to the channel on the homepage. You can do one address, consortiumnews.com.
Great, thank you.
All.
Yeah, and a lot of other people, you take submissions from other journalists as well. So you guys publish a lot of things from different places on Consortium News, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, on every issue,
It's amazing.
You know, whatever's happening. In fact, Joe is my boss, Joe Laurier. He's at the University of Washington at the moment. There are student protests there, and
Right.
He called me this morning. Chris Hedges got arrested reading a poem at Princeton. He was led away, and Joe said that they'd been given the warning in Washington that the police were on the way there too. But you know, it's quite serious. Some of these students are being, sprayed with the tear gas and beaten, and it's like back in the Nam days.
Just real quick, so we'll be off next week because I'm going to be helping Laurel Krauss work on a stream for. Her sister, Allison Krauss, was one of the 4 students killed at Kent State in 1970. And we actually had her on this broadcast, last month. So, but I'm going to be working on something with her next week. So we'll be back on the 9th, and I hope more of the candidates will join in next time. I know you guys are all really busy campaigning, so we understand. We're just trying to build momentum and get people talking. It's such an important issue. It's not just about Assange. I mean, obviously his life's in danger at this point, but this affects all of us. So
Absolutely.
On that note, I'll play this cool song, and thank you for coming, Hank, and Kathy and Matt.
Yeah, good luck with your First Amendment.
Thank you, Kathy. Good luck, Hank.
And back at you.
Power is the ability to exert control over what happens in the world. Absolute power is the ability to exert control over what people think happens in the world. Building 7 to building consent, from Iraq to Sweden to London to Ecuador to Belmarsh and beyond, from covert to COVID. What do we know? What do we know? Only story. Expose the story, expose the story. Expose the story, expose the story. Might just be an opening to a discovery of something that is far beyond them both. Something boundless. Something crackling with potentiality. And something the bastards never saw coming. War started with lies. It can be ended by truth.